Greetings. Welcome to Simmer and Gabby. Rob Simpson, Bruce Boudreau. It is VancouverHockeyInsider.com. And how the heck are you?
I'm doing good. Weather's a little iffy right now, but other than that, a lot of hockey on these days, and today football too. So it's a good day for me.
Heck yeah. Let's talk about number 12s before we get started. Our favorite number 12s or our choice of a number 12 for today. Who would that be for you?
Well, I mean, you wanted to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Wild. So with me, the one player I had that was number 12 that was one of the best players of this generation was Eric Staal. And I had him for 3 years. I mean, he had one, I think maybe two bad years at the end of his career in Carolina. Then he got traded to New York, and I don't think he was happy being a third line guy or a left winger. And we put him back into his natural spot as the first line center. And, I think he got 21 his first year, 42 his second year, and over 20 his third year. So his career definitely wasn't over. And, he was a really good player for me, could do an awful lot of things. And I think it really hurt us when we lost him in the first game of the playoffs, both to St. Louis and in Winnipeg.
And obviously a phenomenal player that helped win a Stanley Cup with the Carolina Hurricanes way back in 2006. He was incredible.
Yeah, no. He had everything. He was, I think, the second pick overall. I had the non-luxury of my first 1 year in the American League when there was a lockout. He played for Lowell, and he was just a beast at 18. And you just knew this guy was going to be a star. And he was, and he's had a great career. Very, very close to being Hall of Fame-ish. I don't know if it's quite Hall of Fame-ish because he didn't win any awards, but he did play on the Team Canada, win a Stanley Cup. He did get 100 points. He played over 1,000 games. I don't know if he got 1,000 points, but I would guess he did. And, so it's close, but a very good hockey player and a good person.
Speaking of number 12s who are Hall of Famers, here's a 10-second clip from Patrick Marleau. I talked to him at the Hall of Fame festivities a couple weeks ago, and I would think, and I'll ask you this after you watch this, that he is a lock, considering he passed Mr. Hockey for most games played of all time, 500 plus goals, yada, yada, yada. Hold on a second. Here's Patrick Marleau after playing in the Legends game.
Just two more. One, you're here playing in the Legends game for the Hall of Fame weekend. Dude, I don't need to tell you. You're pretty much a lock next year.
We'll see.
Is that something you try not to think about, or?
Yeah, you try not to think about it, but a lot of people bring it up to me, so I hope if it happens, it'll be great.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Start practicing your speech.
All right, there he is, Gabby. Patrick Marleau. What do you think?
Well, I think anytime you're the player that you've played the most games in the history of the National Hockey League, that's something that gets you in automatically, let alone getting 500 goals, let alone playing 22 or 23 plus years, being on great teams. And again, another one that was played for Team Canada, international competition. I would tend to think that he was a lock just with those numbers.
Yeah. A first year, like Ryan Miller, who showed up at the Legends game, who's been waiting already. Some of these guys show up and play in that Legends game during Hall of Fame weekend. Kind of, it's like let their presence be known. And as you just mentioned, I don't know if Marleau really needed to do that, but it was a pleasure to chat with him.
Every time you bring up one of these numbers, I mean, you can go down a list and there's some amazing, especially the low numbers, amazing players that played at these positions that we could have chosen. I mean, Jerome McGinley's number 12. Yvon Cornwallis was number 12. These guys are great. I think Cornwallis is in the Hall, but I mean, and Iginla is in the Hall, I'm pretty sure. Or if not, he's going to be a first chance he gets. So I mean, there's many great number 12s. I tend to think of the guys that I have a little bit of association with, and Eric Staal was just one of those guys.
Well, when you mentioned Staal, I brought up having had the conversation with Marleau, but my initial number 12, now this is going way back, Sid Abel. And
Well, yeah, he was one of the best, with the Detroit Red Wings. And in the early 50s, when they won 3 cups in a row, and Sid Abel was the cornerstone between, with Howe and I don't know if
Lindsay,
it was
Ted Lindsay,
Lindsay or Leswick or one of those guys
production
on the
line,
left
yeah.
side. Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable. And then went on to become GM of the Kansas City Scouts. And he was actually, before that, he was the last ever full-time player head coach in the National Hockey League with Chicago Blackhawks. And then,
Wasn't his line, like anytime you get a line named after you, I think wasn't that the production line back then? So, I
Yeah.
mean, you're in pretty good company when you're in that line.
yep, with the Abel, Howe, and Lindsay. And then I think the first or second interview I ever did on the radio at a high school radio station in Michigan, Sid came in. It was Ed Jockman. And then a few weeks later it was Sid. And he came in, he smoked up until he walked through the door, sat down, did a 15-minute interview, and then smoked. Started smoking again.
Back in the day, that's what they did,
But lived to 82. And at that point, he was a really well-known popular broadcaster doing Red Wings games on the radio and television. But Sid was quite a guy. All right, let's jump into, you mentioned you brought up the Wild and your time there. And I just want to get into this season for them. It's been a wacky one. And Dean Evason, who I think took over directly from you, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. They show him the door after a season that didn't, Jared Spurgeon's played a grand total of 8 games for him this season. They go through a losing skid and an emotional departure for him and GM Bill Guerin. What'd you think?
Well, the emotional departure, I mean, to me, that's just a well-written story. The difference you can tell. I mean, when you are known, or not known, where it's known that you are on thin ice or that there's the potential of getting fired. And I mean, in the Minnesota locker room, everybody's walking around like with their head down. No one's happy. No one's, they know there's the stress on the coach, whether you like them or not. And so everything is negative around a team, any team, Minnesota, whatever. And for the most part, I think the Vancouver situation was a little different. But I mean, and then when you change coaches, everybody's got a fresh start. So everybody's in a better mood automatically. And that's why you see almost every time there's a new coach that there's a bump. There's a bump, there's a positive disc, there's a jump in your step. There's all of these things that go on. And I mean, I think Minnesota's getting that now. Do I think they got a better coach? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Hines is a better coach than Dean and Bob. I don't think they've changed much in the look on the penalty killing, except they're being a little bit more aggressive. But I mean, it's that jump in attitude that gets teams off the little slide that they're on, or the big slide that they're on, and the negativism that it comes with it from every whether it's a broadcast, whether it's a blog, whatever. There's always negative stuff associated with it. So now everything is associated with it as positivity. I mean, they're beating Chicago 3-0 again today, so they're well on their way to their 3rd victory in a row.
Yeah, and they're winning in the division, which is important. They beat St. Louis, they beat Nashville. I think you were pretty ticked off, pissed off when you first heard this, though, right?
Heard what? That Dean got fired?
Yeah.
Well, I was ticked off when you're saying all of a sudden you can't coach anymore. Like, I mean, the coaches don't change. Sometimes, I mean, the reason you get fired a lot of times is what I've just mentioned. But I mean, I don't think he changed the system. A lot of it is the same players. The goaltending wasn't as good as the previous year. The defending wasn't as good the previous year, and their star players weren't playing as good as the previous year. Now, is there a reason for that? I don't know. I mean, not in this case. I have no idea. I'm not really too in tune with the Minnesota Wild on a day-to-day basis, but I mean, they definitely, when your goalie the year before is at a .935 save percentage, and this year you're at an .870, that's quite a difference in opportunities. I mean, so I mean, it's goaltenders can make coaches look great or make them look not so great. In this case, I was ticked only because I thought that they were trying to pin all this on the coach, and a lot of it has to be with the players, but at the same time, you can't fire. We all knew what we signed up for when we did this, and you can't fire 23 players. So, I mean, somebody's got to go, because owners don't like sitting there and watching people badmouth their teams, and they don't like seeing empty seats. So, I mean, they had to make a move at this point, and then so far it's been successful.
You were there, you were in Washington, you were in Anaheim pretty quiet. And then of course you went to Vancouver and you got the real taste of the Canadian market. Where would you slide Minnesota in there? The state of hockey, obviously it's part of the culture. It's a pretty progressive area, state and all that, but in terms of hockey, it's ingrained. So where did you kind of find that pressure level compared to maybe the others?
Well, I mean, I didn't find too much pressure, because I was surprised when I got let go.
Right.
And I didn't see any reason. So I wasn't. Now, if this had happened at game 8 of the start of the season with a new GM, because it was the third GM in my tenure there, then I would have been surprised. But I wouldn't have been surprised, because I felt pressure in game 8. But we were on an 8-3-1 run. We were on, we were a top 10 team from the 8th game of the season. So I was a little surprised, and that it happened in late February. In matter of fact, Valentine's Day in February. So, I mean, usually if you're going to get fired, it's going to be around Thanksgiving or early December, and at the latest January. But sometimes in February, when the team's going good, I was a little surprised by that. But I mean, that was the only time. I mean, I wasn't surprised in Vancouver. I knew it was going to happen if we didn't win the cup in Anaheim, and I knew the summer before that in Washington, if we didn't have an incredibly good season like we'd had the previous 4, that or the same thing, wasn't going to win the cup, then something bad was going to happen.
The second part of that, though, for me in Minnesota, when I say pressure, is in the market. You mentioned Mike Russo at one point being a great writer when we were chatting a couple of weeks ago, but how constant is it? In other words, how much of it is?
People were good. People are so nice in Minnesota. It's why they call it Minnesota nice. But I mean, quite honestly, I didn't hear a lot of there was no buzz in the papers about me leaving or me getting fired. There was no talk on, well, if they lose this game, he's done, because we weren't losing. We were doing pretty well. And I mean, we had just finished winning in Dallas on a good team. We lost in a shootout to the Rangers the night before. And that was, I probably wouldn't have got fired if we had won the shootout. But I mean, we had lost to Florida in that run, where they scored a goal in the last second on a double deflection that was an accident. So, it wasn't like there was anything negative to be looking at when that happened. So, I mean, I think that's a different scenario than when you're a playoff team every year and you're mired in 31st place. I mean, people are going to talk. And the only thing is, because Minnesota is situated where Minnesota is, it doesn't get any outside media attention, or as much outside media attention as, say, a New York, a Toronto, Vancouver, or anywhere else. I mean, so it's okay, it's done, let's move on type thing to the next person.
They have just 4 players. You talked about goaltending. We talked about injuries. They only have 4 players with a dozen or more points. So they're not getting a huge contribution depth-wise right now. How good is Kaprisov for you? How
I never had him.
I mean, had him, but when you've seen,
what he was in the organization for 3 years, and everybody kept talking about, Bruce, you're gonna ever love it when this guy gets here. He's great. He's this, he's that. And he went, well, I really will, but it didn't happen. But the one thing, I've coached against him, and I mean, he's got incredible edges. He's got a great release, much like Kucherov's. He's got a nose for the net. I mean, all of these guys, these Russians or these superstars that come over, and they don't have to be Russian, but I mean, they've got some incredibly skilled offensive talent. They're a little bit lacking in the North American game defensively, and it takes a couple years for them to get to understand that. But I mean, offensively, Kaprizov was as good as there was, but I mean, he's one of those guys that's not big either. He's only about 5'10". So when you first see him, you're sort of taken aback, but how good can this guy be? But his quickness and his agility and his all around awareness on the ice when he's got the puck is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and you mentioned it did take him a little while to get here because he played Russian juniors and then worked his way up to the KHL for a season. And I remember, and you were there too for at least once, probably a couple times at the Traverse City rookie tournament that Detroit hosted. Minnesota was always there. And I remember every single year, their broadcaster and their PR guy be like, we think Kaprizov's going to show up this year, but you got to see this guy. And we're like, okay, great. Next year, same thing in September. Oh, this Kirill Kaprisov guy is unbelievable. Third year, we're like, okay, is this kid ever going to show up? And then he obviously showed up and became the.
Well, I had the same situation in Washington. Like when we drafted Kuznetsov, I mean, the first thing George told me is he's not going to be able to come here for 3 years, which was the same situation as Kaprizov. So I mean, it was a great pick by the Wild. I mean, Brent Flair was the AGM, probably doing with Chuck doing those picks, but they won't get credit for it. But they made some really good picks for the Wild back then.
Yeah. Yeah, and he ended up winning obviously the Calder Trophy, and he's off to the races, and he's one of the 4 guys obviously with plenty of points. Actually, Zuccarello is the leading scorer for the Minnesota Wild at the moment. I want to stay out west and talk about your other recent former team, Vancouver Canucks. They beat the Calgary Flames last night. They pick up Zadorov in a trade, and they seem to be going for it, as I put it, in that regard, trying to bolster things a little bit. What'd you think of moving Beauvillier, clearing some cap space, bringing in another big defenseman for a team that already leads the league in hits?
Yeah, I mean, I think Zadorov is a big move for them because I mean, in reality, they picked him up for 2 draft choices, the 3rd and 5th, I think, and which I mean, are hit and misses at the best of times with those guys. So I mean, you get a big, solid defenseman, and I think anybody knows. I mean, and Vancouver's not stupid. I mean, to win in this league, in the playoffs, you need big defensemen, and I think he fits the bill. I think the shocking part was how they got him for so cheap. But moving Beauvillier the day before was a real big stroke, I mean, of genius. I mean, probably only were able to do this deal, quite frankly, if Corey Perry hadn't have gotten into the problem that he got into, because when his contract was up, that allowed Chicago $4 million, and Beauvillier hadn't really panned out in Vancouver. I mean, quite frankly, he had 2 goals, and both of them were in a 10-1 victory against San Jose. So, I mean, to move him and to move somebody up, whether it's from the minors or just give another guy a chance, I don't think was a big stretch. So it was a stroke of genius, I thought, for their management. I mean, it made their team better, and it made their team bigger, and made their team stronger. So I mean, that was really positive.
Did you hear anything about the Leafs were actually gunning for both Zadorov and Tanev somehow? And
I've heard that. I mean, and if you were Brad Treliving and you had both of them and you knew exactly what they were about, you'd certainly, if you believed that they were good players, you'd want them on your team. And I think he wanted them. They just, they didn't have that luxury, quite frankly, of being able to move a player. And I don't know if Calgary really wanted a player at that point. They didn't want, they would have wanted, I mean, for Tanev and Zadorov, they probably would have had to move $7 million or close to $6 million at least. And I don't think they were either ready to, Calgary was ready to take on an extra 6 million, or they wanted a 6 million. Like in Calgary's world, like, I mean, everybody looks at it and say it wasn't a great deal, but that opened up their money. And I mean, maybe now they can go ahead and sign Hannafin. Maybe they can sign Lindholm, and that's what that ability is going to give them. And at the same time, if Zadorov was going to walk after this season, then I mean, then they got the assets they wanted to. So I mean, we'll see how it all pans out.
And the Leafs could still be in the Tanev deal.
I mean, the Leafs could be, yeah, of course. I think I definitely think they need a right-handed defenseman. Who that right-handed defenseman is, I don't know, but I know that when Calgary had Tanev in the lineup in the last couple of years, they were a better team than without him. Especially if you look now, I mean, last night Oscar Killington was skating. So I mean, I'm thinking the other move that Calgary made was, okay, we have to move this guy because Skellington or Killington,
Skellington, yeah, I don't understand that one.
You know, he's on LTIR, and when he comes off, and he had a great year previous to last year, and when he comes off, they're going to have to find the cap. So they just moved the cap space and they got him. So, and they got some assets to begin with, and they got rid of a guy that didn't want to be there. So, I mean, I think it was a win in the end, win for everybody.
Yeah. Bring up a good point about Killington and the pronunciations, because you often in the distant past, it was always Czech guys whose names were completely different than the way they were spelled. But the Killington to Shillington, he's Swedish, and I still haven't figured out how we get there. And I keep forgetting to ask. Besides picking our favorite numbers early on in these podcasts, I also like to sometimes go down memory lane with you a little bit. And one thing that I've had written down for probably 3 weeks, and I keep forgetting to get to. Did you not play 7 or 9 games with the Chicago Blackhawks?
7.
7, and you had a goal.
Yeah.
What was that like? Obviously, you're a Leafs guy, true blue, organizational all the way through for the most part. And then here you are. What the hell went on there with 7?
Well, I was pretty well aware of all the Hawks. Like, I mean, when I first started, Dallas in the Central League or Toronto and Chicago shared a farm club that I was on. So I got to know all the Blackhawks then. And then when I became the first time I became a free agent, Chicago came and signed me. But I mean, again, it was a farm club. I was in their farm club with Edmonton and in Nova Scotia. So when I got called up, I mean, I was in my 30s at the time. So, I mean, I knew I was there for a depth guy, but I mean, they gave me a title. I was their representative to Nova Scotia in the minors in '86. Don't forget, there was no internet. There was no social media as we know it now. So Nova Scotia and Chicago was a long ways away. So if they wanted to get some different answers than from phoning the Nova Scotia Edmonton Oilers coach, they would phone me to get to see if our players were playing, if our players were getting enough ice time, if our players were doing this. So anyway, I was having a pretty good year at the time, and they called me up, and especially it was good. It was around Christmas time, and played 7 games, and the one game I had a 6-second shift and scored a goal. And and like Bob Pulford, this is old school. Like if you were fourth line, a lot of times they did, and he didn't know me, they wouldn't play me. So I mean, I thought I played really good when I was up there. Matter of fact, when I got sent down, Pulley said, "I know I should have played you more, but that's just the way I am," and blah blah blah. So I said, "Yeah, no problem." And but what happened is we had a delayed penalty in St. Louis, and nobody jumped on the ice. So I jumped on the ice, went right to the front of the net. Al Secord gave me a puck. I put it in. Then that was it. He wouldn't put me on anymore. So, I mean, that's the story of my hockey life right there.
Remember who the goalie was for St. Louis?
No, I don't. I mean, I can't remember the goalie. I just know Secord passed me the puck.
I can look that date up. By the way, you were on fire in Nova Scotia. You had 30 goals and 36 assists that year. You were a point a game player for Nova Scotia that year.
That was the lowest points I'd ever had, by the way. I mean,
Yeah,
it was
I see
leading their
that.
team in scoring, but it was the lowest,
Point total.
lowest I'd ever had. So, I mean, I was frustrated with my ability there, because the next year I think I signed with Springfield and got 120 points and
Yep.
and kept getting 100 plus after that. So
By the way, 2 years before Nova Scotia and Chicago, was that the Baltimore Skipjacks, as in the worst team in the history of
no, I wasn't on that team. We were on a team that was actually very,
Pretty
very good.
Okay.
And I played in Europe that year. And the league, you were allowed to sign players coming back from the American League. There was no December 1st rule back then. So I signed with Pittsburgh, and they assigned me to Baltimore. And we ended up losing in the finals. And I think we had the best team. We set an American League record from the day I got there. We won 16 in a row.
Wow.
But we were playing against Sherbrooke in the finals, and Montreal's always been a thorn in my side. And they got two guys that just finished their junior career and came back for the second last round in the final. And that was Patrick Waugh and Stéphane Richer. And so pretty good players. And I think 8 of those players or 9 of those players moved up to Montreal the next year, and they won the Stanley Cup. So,
Wow.
I mean, if you have to lose to the other time I lost in the finals as a coach, Montreal did the same thing. They brought up this guy, Carey Price, and he beat us in the finals. So, I mean, those Montreal goalies have been a thorn in my side from the beginning.
And your coach in Baltimore, kind of a legend?
Gene Ubriaco,
Yeah.
he was a legend, a great man. Really enjoyed playing for him. He was very tough, but I mean, he was one of those old school tough guys, but he was a good communicator.
Yeah. Originally from the Sioux and kind of sowed his oats in the Toronto area, I believe.
Yeah.
As a younger guy. One last quickie. At the end of your career, you played for Fort Wayne Comets. Who was the famous broadcaster that was there for
Bob
6 years?
Chase.
Bob Chase.
He was there 52 years. I mean, I was a big proponent. I didn't know why he wasn't in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He had started with that franchise in the early 50s, 51, 52. I think by the time he was all done, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But I mean, I think he did over 60 years of Comet hockey. And back in the day when AM radio was still big, he was 1120 on Whoa. And it was one of those stations, for whatever reason, you could get it all over the country.
Yeah.
And everybody got a chance to hear Bob Chase on the radio.
Yeah. Whoa, and it bounced like WJR in Detroit. Same thing. You can pick it up anywhere. Pick it up on the bounce.
Exactly.
Amplitude modulation. Yeah, Bob Chase. Great point though, Gabby. Just because he was a minor leaguer doesn't mean he shouldn't be awarded the Foster Hewitt for 60 years.
I think there's, whatever. I mean, you know how hard it is to go through the minors and have a voice that everybody knew, like Bob Chase. It was, there's so many people learned from him.
Yep.
Including Doc Emmerich,
was
one of Bob Chase's biggest fans. And so, I mean, all of those things worked out pretty well.
I was just going to bring that up. The Doc credits him with a lot of it. So great stuff, Gabby. I'll let you go. You got some football and some hockey to take care of. Great job today, and always fun to go down memory lane, as I mentioned, and hear a little bit about your scoring, man. You were outrageous, by the way. Piled it up.
Yeah, I had a lot of them, but I mean, it was great for me in the minors. I mean, I had 6 100+ point seasons, and I would have loved it to have been in another league, but those things happen. I mean, some of us are meant to be minor league players, and there's been so many, being in Hershey, so many great minor league players, in the day here. So I mean, that when the 6 team NHL was around, and these guys just couldn't quite cut the NHL, but were fabulous hockey players nonetheless.
How was your face-offs?
I was yeah, I just don't like talking about myself, but I know in 86 and 87 when they first started doing them, and we had our guy in Nova Scotia saying I was at 73%.
Damn.
I thought I was pretty good. I knew I used to have some tremendous battles in junior with Doug Jarvis, who became one of the better face-off men.
Yep.
But I mean, it was, and like in the American League, we had some incredibly good face-off. Everything was a competition because there was almost no rules on the face-off. You could kick and gouge and spear and everything else. And so, I mean, anything to win the face-off was a big deal.
Yeah. Dougie Jarvis, legendary face-off man. So if you're getting after it with him, that's good stuff.
Mm.
All right, Gabby, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the hockey action this week.
I will, and I'm sure we will talk soon. You do the same with your group down there, and we'll see you soon.